Everyone, thank you, Jackie, thank you, Ann Arbor Library. To start, we'll say we're going to try and save we have a period of time at the end for questions. So we're going to save our questions to the end. But in this presentation, I want it to be a conversation. So if I'm talking about a concept or something that you're really kind of like unsure about, please feel free to stop me, raise your hand. I want to make sure it's, clarified, you understand it, so we can all move forward as a group. So that being said, I want to get a feel for who I'm talking to. So do we have photographers in the audience? So we have some photographers. Do we have the rest of us? Do we do like just photos with our phone and such like that? Okay, we do photos with our phone. We like nature, so we're here because we like nature and doing that. For the people that are photographers, do we have macro photographers? Okay, so we have that. So it's like basic concepts. And the rest is just like, we're here just to kind of learn basic concepts and see what I do. We can move forward from that. Because it's a lot of fun. So, and I always like to say, we'll show this at the end. If you're not following me on Instagram, you should be. I like sharing my story with everyone. I like having conversations and dialogues and things of that nature. And that's also my contact information that I'm always like open to like questions, people talking to me, reaching out. Like there's no wall here. So we are going to start. Boom. With our wonderful little ambush bug. So we have an introduction to macro photography with, and as I fall over because I move around too much, myself. So time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. It's a fun, thank you for the laughs. I start my presentations with this quote. I've done it since I started, and I think it's become a running little gag with myself that I'm going to keep doing because it's a funny little pun, and it also gets to share a little bit about myself. And I take what I do very seriously, but I also like to have fun while I'm doing it. And we have a little Halictus legatus on a ragwort flower, in case you're wondering. And this is going to be the outline of the topics. This is kind of like, I'm going to kind of go through here so you can have like a little bit of a roadmap of what I'm talking about, so you're not like feeling lost, like, where's he going next? So that's what people typically would say about me in life. So I'll go through it and we can just read it and see about me. We're going to talk about, like what makes it macro. We're going to talk a little basic photo settings, how to get to one-to-one, how to see and observe, what I call chasing the light, how to try and make, get the image that you see in your head. And then all the things of going beyond one-to-one, different lenses and techniques you can do, tips and techniques, and then, using your phone as a tool as well, because all these concepts that I'm going to be talking about can be applied to the phone, even though you don't necessarily have a macro lens on it and such. You can still use some of the techniques and tips for that as well. So about me, that's me. Still there. And I didn't start out wanting to do this. This is kind of like I've been working in advertising for the past 30 years. I'm been a retoucher, designer. I've been an artist throughout that time. I've been a photographer throughout this time. It wasn't until about 10 years ago that I started in macro photography that all changed. So I'm thinking I'm going to do some like fine art macro in my backyard. This is going to be fun. I needed to change from the work that I was doing creatively. Realize I don't know anything about anything. It's all rubbish. And so I spent a couple years learning, developing like my skills and such like that and trying to evolve it. Still thinking I'm just going to be a fine art macro photographer taking photos of whatever I find. But that changed because I did a show at the Belle Isle Nature Center. I meet Dr. Mary Jameson, ecology professor, who happens to have a display of pin bees because she's doing bee research, native bees. We start talking, and she's doing non-lethal research, non-lethal documentation of these bees. cool, you're a macro photographer, you photograph bees. Oh, we're trying to do something different and not just net, kill, pin, take photographs. We want to see them actually in the environment. So we start working together, become friends. That was a changing point for me, because I realized all of a sudden the concept that I had of like being a fine art like photographer, taking photos of macro, it could be, like this idea, it grew legs. It could be so much more than what I originally intended it to be, because it could be fine art. It could be, enjoyable photos and pretty photos to get people to look at and change their mind perspective of these insects and these organisms that are around us. It could be, used for presentation and outreach. And then most importantly, the photos I was taking could be data. And that data was being used by researchers and scientists, and it was like going beyond the page. So really, when people see like, the body of work that I do and that I present, and when I do shows and I have prints and I have, photos on the wall, and the Nature Center, I have photos outside, that's just like this little tip of the iceberg. The rest of it, all of it, is the data that I'm able to collect and provide when needed for research. So it's really fun. And when I started out, importantly, I like to say, in the early days, when I was just starting, I wanted to be an ethical photographer. So when I set out to do this, it was very important to me that I do no harm to my subjects. I didn't, I'm looking online, seeing how people photograph things. I'm not going to capture, kill a subject just to get a photograph of it. To me, that was wrong, and that's not who I was and not who I wanted to be. And also the do no harm extended out to in the environment. So I'm out photographing something, I see a bee on a flower or such, I'm not clipping that flower to move it to a different stage to take a photograph of it, because now I just, destroyed that flower, destroyed the seeds. I'm changing the environment around me. Plus I just ruined it for whoever's following behind me, that wanted to possibly see that flower. Now they can't. So that was the other one. So I photograph everything, in situ, where it is, and everything I do is handheld. And that just kind of evolved because tripods for me are way too slow and clumsy for the work I like to do. And I guess too, also, somewhere along the way, I did become a naturalist, and I started learning more and more about the subjects that I'm photographing, which really helps when you're photographing something and its behavior, what it's doing. You can you have this predictive, this predictive idea of where it's going to be, when it's going to come out. And it does help and inform your photography. That's where it began. In my backyard, with the front yard. But that's, this me going out and playing. Simple yard, right? Nothing fancy, simple little ragtag, backyard, habitat in pots, things growing everywhere. But this was my outdoor studio. This is where I honed my skills. That's the fun part of macro. You can do it anywhere. It doesn't have to, we live in nature. We exist in this. You don't have to go out to the far off lands to see amazing things. You can see it anywhere, anywhere we go outside, we're gonna find something. So this way we're all on the level field here, and we all understand what we're talking about. What do we consider macro? And I work on full frame, so everything I talk in this presentation is gonna be based on full frame sensors, because that's what I use. And I'll even say about this conversation and telling you about macro photography and such, this is how I do it. And this is how I learned. This is what I do. My objective is not for you necessarily to do exactly what I do to, do what I do, but see what I'm doing and adapt it to your styles, make it your own, because you're not going to be photographing necessarily the exact same things that I am. So if you try and translate that, it may not exactly work, but it's a good starting point. So what is macro? It is life size. So it's 1:1 on the imaging sensor, like imaging plane, film, whatever it is. So I always say you're taking a photograph of a 10mm bee, you're looking on your 35mm sensor, at minimum focusing distance of your lens, at actual size, that bee will be 10mm. Actual size. And why is that important? Because you have this like this relation of like what you're actually looking at. So are we clear on what 1-to-1 actual size would be? So that's what's considered macro. So we have a nice little animation bit here. Say like, okay, so the sensor on the left is my full frame sensor. In there, I'm kind of showing like what the other sensors are. And we have like a little, 10 millimeter B and profile that kind of go like, all right, this is what we're going for. So as it moves across the frames, here we have this B, I photograph it, minimum focusing distance of my lens. My lens only does 1-to-1 to 5-to-1. So if it's beyond that, it's gonna be blurry. If it's in focus, and I bring that back to the computer and I shrink that image back down to like, 35 millimeter film size, and I measure that, I go, okay, it's about 10 millimeters. All right, it's actual size. But as I move across and I go to like crop sensors, you see the B gets larger. Well, the B doesn't get larger. You're just cropping in on it because we're using the same lens here, the same 100 millimeter lens, like say across all the different sensors, and all it's doing is projecting a larger and larger image. So why does that make a difference? Because when you get to smaller images or smaller sensors, it's actually just cropping in on that image. Now we won't go into micro four thirds and 4/3 sensors and such like that. Great cameras, works. It's just not what I use. It's not what I started with. So we're going to keep going with like the full frame. So then you go down to a small, like little, third sensor, and you see that B is actually almost larger than the sensor. So you're going to have some, trickery with the lens where it's compressing that image down to fit on the sensor. So it's no longer actual size. So this is a good example. Here you have a little wasoglasm, little sweat-bee, and a chai flower. So our presentation aspect ratio isn't exactly 35 millimeter, but this was photographed around like 1-to-1. Again, the lens I'm using.
I'm sorry.
Nope.
When we move on about the sensors, can I ask you one thing?
Yes, you may.
The sensor size on 1-to-1 is rather arbitrary definition, but we know that smaller sensor cameras by nature have a very deeper depth of field, solving many of the problems of macro photography. Are you going to talk about that? Or
Not really, because that's a gray area, and we can talk like offline about that because I think it becomes a little bit too in depth. Smaller sensors and different lenses, you can't really trick physics because if that 10 millimeter B is on a 4/3 sensor, it still has to be 10 millimeter. So really you're getting a projection of like 2x native on that sensor, and then that lens can do another 2x, so it's really 4x. To get it to fit on that sensor, you have to compress it down. So your depth of field now is not exactly reality. Not say like if you're using a wide angle lens, which naturally has a deeper depth of field. So it's that like touchy gray area, and there's many like Reddit arguments over like what's better or what's not. I still like my full frame camera over like the micro 4/3 and such like that. So if you looked at it on the 35 millimeter frame, here you have the the bee still in the chai flower. If we were to again measure it, I could say like, okay, this bee is probably about 8 millimeters in size. I have this like I have this relation that I can kind of like use as a basis of measurement if I need to, without capturing the specimen and actually doing like measurements in a lab, which I just don't do. What's not considered macro? Taking a photo with a telephoto lens or even a macro lens. You could be photographing with your 100 millimeter macro, but you're not at the minimum focusing distance, so you're not at 1-to-1. You're so you're not say 7 inches from the front of the lens. You're now 2 feet out. Well, that subject is now maybe quarter life size. So if you cropped in on that image, it's not really a macro shot. It's a telephoto shot. It's not a horrible shot. We're not saying like you can't do it. We're not saying that it's, it's a bad thing. It's just in this context, when we're talking about true macro photography, it doesn't really fit into that realm. It fits more into like the telephoto realm. So a little example, little clear wing. I cropped in on it just for fun, just to show like, okay, it's not, this isn't what we consider macro photography. Still good, still fun images, still fun to do, still acceptable. It's just not that. Before we even start and go, why macro? I said what is macro, but why macro? And I think I said it earlier, because it's fun. It's the most fun you'll have with a camera. And I consider like a little 5x5 patch of grass, weeds, flowers, nature, out looking at trees. Doesn't matter. A little patch of anywhere. It's the most fun you'll have because you get to see things that people normally overlook. People walk by every day. You get to see the things that are unseen. So that's why macro. And I say lenses, what do you need? It all depends. This is going to depend on, it's not like a one lens fits all, right? It depends what you want to photograph. Are you photographing flowers? Well, your lens needs are going to be different. Are you photographing, bees, bumblebees, a little bit larger? You can deal with, a little bit different lens. Now, if you're getting into some of the native, bees, or smaller, well, you're going to need something that does higher magnification, so your lensing is going to have to adjust from there. There's many ways to get there. So it's kind of like what you want to photograph is going to determine and kind of like it's going to educate you what you're going to obtain to actually pick a lens. So this is my current lineup. The lens that I love and I've been using for the past 9 years and rarely comes off my camera is the MP65. It's a Canon lens. It does 1:1 to 5:1. That's it. I cannot photograph anything larger than a 35 millimeter frame. And the world I live in for that is like 1 inch off the front of the lens to 4 inches. That is the world I live in. Anywhere I look is like from there. And the lens kind of, it'll extend the front of the lens. It's kind of like a built-in bellows, so it extends out, but it still doesn't change. Like, the front of the lens gets further from my face, but that distance, is going to adjust accordingly. But I'm always, very close to the subjects. Love that lens. I can't speak of it, highly enough. It's always on the camera. Second one I use is surprisingly the 100 to 400. I usually put a teleconverter on there. So it's aspect ratio. It's doing probably like third life size. With the teleconverter, I can kind of like cheat it up to not quite, like half life size. I can't really cheat it to that, but it's still pretty good. What is it good for? It's great for, bumblebee, doing bumblebees, bumblebee identification. It's great for me when I'm photographing butterflies because most butterflies are, way too large. And they would never fit on my 35 millimeter frame. So by nature, I need something that I can, creep in on. And like I said, for bumblebees, they're great. Bumblebees are fast. I want to do a lot of ID work. I can still get good photos with it as well, but it allows me to have that like greater working distance because they're moving pretty fast. And then I have my standard like EF 100, which does 1:1. And I use that for varying things when I want to be possibly like at actual size, but because I like breaking rules, I may be going half-life size, quarter-life size. Depends, again, on the subject that I'm photographing. Right tool, right job. That's when you're working in photography or any arts, use the right tool for the right job. And occasionally, I still bust out my the Venus optics, the 15 millimeter, and that does 1:1. But that's a crazy lens because for you to do actual size, the working distance off that front of the lens is probably less than 5 millimeters. Very difficult actually to get light onto, but it's really great for doing quarter life size, half life size, things of that nature. And I have examples later on for that. A little bit longer working distance, I sometimes break out my Sigma 180, which gives me a little bit longer, working distance. If I'm just doing, again, bumblebee work or say butterfly work or larger, smallish butterflies, I can photograph with that. And then sometimes I'll bring out my 7200, which has an abysmal magnification ratio. It's only like, a quarter life size. But the good thing about that lens is it's a super fast lens. It's a sports lens. It does like 2.8. It's a 2.8 constant aperture. So it's really great for low light, situations where it's getting to be dusk or you're in the woods and such, and you want, okay, I don't have as much reach as my 1-400, but I have the capability of, using, gathering more light into the lens, so I can adjust my shutter speed and ISO accordingly.
Can you just give us an idea of what the speeds are the other one?
This is like this 2.8. 2.8. I usually use that around f11. Anything greater than that on this lens, the MPE, you start getting diffraction. So you think like, okay, I'm going to go to like, I can't go to like f16 because once you get to that range, because of the magnification ratio, aspect, it actually, you'll have great depth of field, but it's going to be fuzzy. You'll never be sharp. You can't overcome, the physics of the lens and diffraction. The EF is, I think that's somewhere like around 5, 6 to 7. When I put the teleconverter on there, it jumps up to like f8 or so. Still perfectly good to use. The EF 100 is, that's a 2.8 to like 32. I'm usually using it around like f16, somewhere like that, depending on what I'm using. The 15 is an f4, and it's a relatively slow lens, but it's wide, so it lets enough light in, so you can kind of like work with it. The 180 is a 3.5, and then the 7200 is a like 2.8 constant aperture. So yeah, that's the lineup. Again, my MPE 65. Love that lens. Most of the images that you see in this presentation are all going to be based on that. So current camera bodies, in case anyone cares, I have the R5, which is mated to the MPE 65. That stays on. That's pretty much fused together and never leave. Those two never leave each other. And then my older Mark IV, that gets the 100 to 400, and so I have my cotton carrier, and I have one on my chest, one on my hip. I'm walking out into the field, so anytime I want to photograph something, I can photograph something really small or kind of larger and further away. I want to be able to switch it up in between. And my flash that I'm using for the MPE is I use the MT26 EX flash, and that is how that all kind of looks together on the right there. My own DIY diffuser for that, and it's got a built-in, rigged up a video light. I wired up my own video light so I can switch that on and off, and I can switch between doing photos and videos with the R5 is why I love the setup so much. So for the photographers out there, are we pretty much familiar with the photographic triangle and such for photographers? For those that aren't photographers, the phones don't do this as much. It's always this balancing act, right? It's this game of what am I photographing? How am I photographing it? And what exactly, what am I trying to achieve? If I'm photographing butterflies in flight, I need fast shutter, right? I'm gonna have to freeze that. If I have a fast shutter and the light's like this, my ISO might be kind of high, and my f-stop, well, I want they're a little bit further away, so I can deal with say f11 or f8, f11, somewhere like that, because I don't have to worry about the depth of field as much with that. So you're constantly adapting and adjusting to what you're photographing, to how you're doing your setups. For amateur photographers, I always say, and I've done this myself, you put your camera on auto. Put your camera on auto, take a photo, look at it. You want to evaluate a scene? Take a photo, look at the back of your camera, see what it says, and kind of go from there. And you go all right, I did this, I'm photographing a butterfly. Well, it's blurry. So what I'm gonna need to do, I'm gonna have to increase my shutter speed. If I increase my shutter speed, I'm gonna have to adjust my, the ISO to accommodate for less light. for that shutter speed being faster. And then I might keep my my f-stop the same because I want it to be, as much as in focus as it can be. When you get into the world of macro, a lot of this, it doesn't go out the window, but you're dealing with physics of light. So you've got this little like fractional size, you've got this little 35 millimeter area. And with my lens, I'm only, 4 inches from the front of the lens. There's not enough photons in that little area that can bounce off my subject, hit the sensor, and register anything. Unless I was really to say like, yeah, I'm gonna go for my ISO is gonna be, cranked up to like, 12,000 or greater. It's gonna be a lot of noise. Probably my aperture is gonna have to be super, super wide, which means I'm gonna lose even like my depth of field is gonna be completely ruined. And my shutter speed is probably gonna be really, really slow. And if it's, I'm gonna have to make it really slow. And in the macro world, where you think like, Jack and I were talking earlier, you think like a snail moving, like snails are slow, right? You think snails are fast or slow? They're pretty slow. Until you look at them up close at actual size, 2x, 3x, and they're booking across that frame to the point where you are moving every couple seconds trying to adjust to see them because they're crossing the field of view faster than you can think. So if you were to have a slow shutter speed and you're like, 30th of a second or, quarter of a second or something like that, you're just gonna have a blur. It's gonna look like that snail's moving super fast because now it's gonna be like this motion blur. So we overcome that in the macro world typically by using a flash. And the flash then has its advantages. It's going to act as your shutter. It's going to give you more light. It's going to fill in the object where you can't. It's harder to do in natural light. Now, if you're photographing flowers and you're not doing like insects, you're photographing. Typically, flowers don't get up and move around on you, so it's there. You might have to deal with some wind and some motion, but you have the ability to work with a lens with a little bit maybe longer working distance. Okay, we got the 180, we got the 100, and so instead of being 4 inches, you're dealing with 9 inches, you're maybe dealing with like 12 to 18 inches from there. Well, now it's still actual size, but it's further enough away where there's actually more light bouncing off the subject, hitting there. And then, in the case of a flower, you can adjust, you can play around with like, okay, I can use a slower shutter speed. I can do something of, that nature to get my photo because it's not moving around. Where the case of most insects, they're constantly in motion. There's some that are pretty, they're pretty like, still, and they're kind of fun to play with, take photos of. But even then, you're still, from my world, you're still dealing with such a small area where I always have to use my flash to get the proper exposure. So this is one of those, like, to know it, you have to do it and experiment with. Phones, to a point, to some extent, you can play around with. They have like some, aperture simulation, ISO simulation, stuff like that. Some even have like the capability of doing slow shutter speeds. So you can get that drag, or if you set it on a little tripod, you can get longer exposures. But it's still not the same as a regular, like the physics of a real camera, or an actual camera, because it's most of the time they're using like simulations. That being said, there are some phones out there that do, tremendous jobs at like phone and macro photography. This is from my early on, journey. Observation for me, and this comes also just from being an artist. Observation's everything. When I talk about things in my early days, I would go out in my back garden, barefoot, cup of coffee. Camera was out with me, but it was on the table. Before I even pressed, the shutter, did anything, I didn't run out there and quick take, photos. I wanted to see who the cast of characters was. I wanted to see, who was visiting backyard, who I could approach, who when I got near was flying away, who when I got near didn't really care. You kind of like see this like little pattern. You start building this like pattern up in your head. So then you knew, oh, I can approach the small, like little sweat bees, the small oxaloplasms and stuff like that. I can approach them quite easily. They don't care. Leafcutter bees, great eyes. They're not really letting me get, too close. Bumblebees, for the name being bumbly, are really quick. And they're like bap, 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 bap on the flower. They're not really being in the flower, where other bees, I'm noticing, all right, you're collecting pollen, so you're really pushing the pollen on the legs. You're sitting there in the flower. You're sitting still, where, oh, I see that you're just nectaring. And again, bap, 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 hopping along the flower, drinking fast. So you kind of like build this up. So the observation for me is key. And it also helps because you know when things are coming out. So you can anticipate, oh, in the case of this is a small Adrena. It's a spring beauty mining specialist. So it coexists with the spring beauty flowers, spring ephemeral. So you find the spring beauty flower, most likely you're gonna find this bee. See that beautiful pink pollen on her legs? She has to feed her larva this pink pollen, the pollen off the spring beauty for them to develop. They have a symbiotic relationship. So in the springtime, when I see those flowers coming out, I know to look for the bees. As well as, we went too fast. We'll get back. So in the field, I'm the guy that most likely people are gonna ask, are you okay? Should I call somebody? Because I'm laying, I'm laying in the ground, my face pointed towards a patch of dirt. The flowers are over there. What are you taking photos of? And me, I've learned to see there's a wonderful field, Royal Oak. There's an aggregation of this Caledius equalis. You can see right there, little teeny. She's just poking out. But I know that, okay, the first foods of bees in the springtime we think are flowering trees and shrubs. So I know when the maple trees are in bloom and the maple flowers are out, I know to look for Caledius because she loves, maple pollen. That's what she's going to feed on. That's her first food. So I know, but this is observation again. This isn't just like, you can go and you research things too, but this is actually like observing, seeing, oh, these bees are out in this time, and you're seeing like what's in bloom, where they're feeding off of. And it's fun. It builds up this whole bit of like, you can anticipate where they're, like when they're going to come out, what they're going to do. And then I know like, all right, I'm going to look at all these holes in the ground as they're emerging, because I know that, they're either emerging just from the ground, or they are like this, like, this female, she's just coming out of her nest, or she's already like emerged from last year, and now she's provisioning a new nest for her young. Solitary bee, one female, one nest, that's it. 70% of the world's bees are ground nesting, and most are solitary. That's the above and beyond. That's the naturalist part of things, of like learning what things are. And a male Caledius, also that's on a spring beauty flower, just posing and looking ever so adorable and cute. Walking, and if you like going on walks and actually walking, I always say don't go with a macro photographer. Because it's like, it is literally here, stop. The park entrance is there. We haven't even made it to the park entrance yet. We're stopping here because there's a patch of something and we see something and we have to photograph it. And that's where we're gonna probably spend the next half hour or so. I walk by and I go on a trail. I see like a rotting stump. Can't resist a rotting stump, just can't. Why? Because I know from previous observations, there's someone that most likely is going to live in here and make it her home. And that would be Chloropura. She's a beautiful little sweat bee. She has overwintered in a different log over the winter, and now she's making provisioning like these stumps and stuff like that are really rotten, really soft. In a matter of like a year or so, that stump was completely gone. But you build up this mental like observation. I'm like, all right, I know you live here. It's springtime. I'm probably going to see you. She's going to come out, and it's observation. That's half of what photography is, or I guess even being an artist is just knowing where your subjects are. Sometimes you're completely surprised once you're surprised, you learn what surprised you, and then you kind of like do some like research so you can replicate or try and find it again. But it really helps find your subject matter, and then knowing, oh, I see a hole in the wood, I might perch out and camp out and see, if she's going to come out. And same thing with the bees in the ground. You see them in the ground, you play, a little tag of like peekabee, where they go in, they come out, go in, come out, come in, come out. They realize that this big thing in front of them, this big, diffuser that you saw earlier, really isn't a threat. I have no intention on, of eating them or harming them. I have to try and convince them that I'm not trying to eat them. Then after a while, they're like, okay, cool. You're just this new thing that appeared in my, in my area. I can ignore you and go about my way. Same thing, found this. What do you think this is? Anyone? No. Pardon? Spider. So who said spider? Yes, it's one of our native ant mimic spiders. So I was doing this UV walk at the nature center, and I'm prepping to go. So I'm looking, and that's, just what do you do when you're prepping for something? You go out and look for other things to photograph and see. And I'm looking up in the tree to find things that, fluoresce under UV light. And I see some motion on this leaf. Looks like an ant from visual, and I don't wear my glasses, so it looks like a blurry ant. But it's not moving like an ant. So it's like that whole like observation. Okay, you're not doing what I think you should be doing if I think you are what you are. And, sure enough, what is it? A little ant mimic spider. So it's that observation. It's like slowing down, seeing like, seeing things. And it's pretty convincing as well. And we have pseudoscorpions in Michigan. Totally fun, little arachnid, little teeny tiny thing. Okay, so the fun part of it, this one is, it's probably like, it's about a millimeter, maybe smaller. I was really photographing some isopods, and it was under a little piece of bark. I like to play a little game in the backyard called Flip the Bark, see what's there, because why not? Because it's fun, you get to see. So, and I'm photographing the isopod, and all of a sudden I see this little tiny thing moving, and I'm like, I focus in on it, pretty much scream, because I, long time listener, first time caller, had seen other people, photographing these, and knowing like everyone finds them everywhere. People find them in their house, because they like to eat, book lice. You have a lot of books, you'll find, book lice, eating the books. You'll find pseudoscorpions around who happen to love eating book lice. Anyhow, excited, but again, it's that like the observation of like looking. So I keep looking for them and seeing them and knowing like, that's why you flip bark, because things that live under bark, and you may find something that you didn't quite expect. Same thing, you have aphids. People always complain. That's one, like you're in the forums, everyone's like, oh, what's this thing on my plant? It's eating my plants, blah, 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 blah. Well, Leander aphids are destroying my plants. Well, I knew I had syrphid flies around the backyard. So what's a great predator of aphids? Syrphid fly larva. Pretty much, it's a maggot, very beautiful maggot that lives on the stems and pretty much cleans up all the aphids for you. But it's an observation. You see aphids around, you don't take a hose and like quickly, as a macro photographer, you don't take a hose and spray it all down. You're like, all right, predators are gonna come and take care of you. And that's a photo opportunity as well as a little teaching moment. This is also in the Entomological Society of America calendar a couple years ago. This little wasp ovipositoring in the head of this aster. Most likely, we kind of like deducted it was probably like going after like there was like weevil larvae in there, at least from the entomologist I was talking with. So the cool thing is observation, seeing. It's the end of a photo shoot. I never pack up my camera. I'm like, okay, I'm not done. I'm never done till I'm actually in the car driving away. But I happen to be walking out and I see a little bit of motion flying. I don't know what you are. But it was cool. It was a great moment, great observation. You're always looking to see. You see, especially like different times of the year, you see wasps flying around the top of the flower. It's either feeding, on the nectar because it needs the nectar to fly, or it's, laying eggs in something because for its young, or it's trying to actually collect some sort of larva to bring back to feed its young. And I was excited totally to share this, this leaf miner, this in an ash leaf. Normally when I see leaf mining activity, I see the remnants of the leaf miner, but I never see the leaf miner itself. This actually got to find a couple leaf miners actively mining. And it's on its back. It's a little, caterpillar. It's on its back, and there it is, chewing between the two layers of leaf. Spent a very long amount of time photographing this, but again, it's like one of those observation. You're walking, you're seeing. I see like a little patch of leaves that have leaf miner evidence on it. I'm like, let's I know the leaf miner. I know that I may find something. Most of the time, they've already pupated at the edge of the leaf, and you see the remnants of it. Got lucky because you stop, you observe, you see. That's half of what I do is just walk around, looking at things, and actually staying in one spot, looking at things. Or we have this wonderful, these are stink bug eggs, and we have a little wasp on there that is most likely laying her eggs. She's a parasitoid. She's laying her eggs inside the eggs of the stink bug. And this one happened to see, I remember things when I saw it. Hot day. It was during one of the, it was a really, really hot week in June a couple years ago. But I'm walking by, not a lot's flying, but I see a little shadow on a leaf. See a shadow on a leaf, that means either something's casting the shadow. Happen to be, and mind you, we're only talking a scene that's maybe 10 millimeters in height. So you can see that, and then I know from other observations that wasps are most likely, laying her eggs. So I got a series of her on the eggs, and also again playing that game, flip the bark in the backyard just to see, finding some globular springtails, which again these are fun because these are only about a millimeter in size. Some of them are even smaller than a millimeter, depending on the type and the age. So this is where you're doing macro, but you're doing 1:1, 2:1, 3, 4 times life size, to try and get the photo. So I call it, let me say, chasing the light. Chasing the light. To me, that means I want to have my light be as close to what I see, what I want in my image. And for me, that's using the flash. I've used the twin flash from pretty much the start of my macro journey. And that combination, I'll be honest, that combination with the MPE is not the most forgiving. It's not the easiest setup, but it's what I know, as well as I love it because with my lens travels further out, and that flash attaches to the front of the lens and travels with the lens. So my lighting, I have a little bit more control of the lighting. My goal always when I'm lighting a scene is to avoid harsh specular reflections, which basically means you have these bright hot spots and you're obliterating the data that's underneath it. So, and once that data is gone, it's gone. There's no recovering it. There's no bringing it back. And then how I photograph, there's no cloning. There's no retouching involved. The photos are, as I see it, the only thing I remove is sensor dust. Always fighting against sensor dust, especially with the mirrorless, especially with the MPE, the way it works as a bellows. I'm always fighting sensor dust. That's the only thing I remove. That's important as well. So, question, or we got it? Okay. So for this, I want to talk about our exposure triangle. The flash for me works as a shutter, and the flash, the lower your duration, the faster that flash. It's emitting the same amount of light. It's just the amount of time that it's actually exposing. So the shorter duration helps freeze motion better. So I get to control the light. I'm not really dependent on, well, it's bright, it's sunny, it's cloudy, doesn't matter, I'm in shade. I can photograph in bright sun. I can photograph in the dead of night. I have to adjust a little bit because of the ambient light from the sun. I may be able to lower my flash a little bit more, or the dead of night, I may have to really lower my flash output because it is so bright, like it's overpowering the scene. Then again, bright sun, I have a very dark subject on, dark background. It's just eating up all that light. I have to adjust it, but I have full control over that. Most of the time, my settings are within, a few stops of each other. It eliminates, like I said, the motion blur, and I can, with my lenses, I can use it like around f11. I can have a little bit more depth of field because we're only dealing with single image. We're not doing focus stacking. We're not doing any of that. We're doing one frame, one image. There's nothing wrong with focus stacking. I work as a retoucher, and I have for the past 30 years. And early on, I decided I don't want to sit in front of the computer for extended amounts of time doing this work. That's not what I do. I do this for a living, like retouching and such. I don't want to do it for my fun as well. Most of the time when I'm working and processing an image, it's probably like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, start to finish. Most of that is removing the sensor dust and going through. So when you're dealing with flash, there's something called apparent light size. What that basically means is you have a large light source relative to the subject. So you're taking, this is all, little secret, this is all portrait photography. You want to learn lighting? Study portrait photographers. Because you take this big concept, portrait photography, and you shrink it down to doing macro work or whatever kind of work. So in the case of that, I have my large, reflector, or at one time in the early photo that you saw, there were two smaller reflectors, but they were still larger than the insect, and they were large in relation. So if you have this large light source, you get nice, soft, even like fall off lighting. Then from there, you work on, your actual diffusion itself, because you can have this large light source, but still have like hot spots and still have like these harsh specular highlights. So you want to use appropriate diffusion material, and it's going to depend on your flashes, your setup, your lenses, the distance that you're working and shooting to adjust this. But it makes it so you don't get, like if you look at, this butterfly's eyes, you don't get any harsh highlights. And, this is a case where I only brought my one lens out. I think at the time I only had one camera body. I decided, okay, I'm just going to go out with my macro lens, no other lenses, because I didn't feel like changing it in the field. Found a butterfly. It was a cooler day. Trying to, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to do some portraits of it. And it's a good reference of saying, like, okay, when you look at the eyes, you don't want to blow out that detail, because once it's gone, it's gone. And these are just like different examples of, lighting and such like that. And you can tell, a little cheat thing too is you can look at like, especially things that are highly reflective, like cases of this, like the spider's eyes, the Phidippus audex. And you can look in the reflection of the eyes to kind of see what someone did and what they use as a diffuser. In this case, I was using the early iteration of one of my diffusers, which was two soft, basically the two soft boxes with the connecting bridge. So you kind of like can see that change of lighting in the middle. This is where it gets to be sort of like a personal preference. Some people like half moon shapes, like the reflectingness in spider's eyes. Some people absolutely hate it. And they're like, that's not what spider's eyes look like. They should be completely black. This is what they should look like. And, there's arguments, again, that exist online that, like, do what you want to do as long as it represents reality. The only thing I care is that you're not, like, retouching out something in the spider itself or painting in detail that actually was not there. In this case, we have a little leaf cutter, a little Megkylie. And this, he's about, he's probably about 10 millimeters in size, probably photographed, about like, 2x, a little plus. But again, you see a little subtle like highlight here, but you can still see the detail and data behind it. It's not completely blown out. And that's because I'm using large light source, relative to the subject, as well as proper diffusion, materials to get the light to be soft enough. So it's diffused and it's soft as well. Front yard, little chafer beetle and hydrangea, little lovely background. Colors, soft. If you looked at this, like most of the images, you can't tell. You wouldn't be able to guess what the lighting condition was like outside by looking at the photos. And that's the fun part of using the flash. And having that is you can make not quite identical to daylight, but you're getting pretty close. You're eliminating a lot of the harsh shadows and such like that. Should probably note, I don't use some people use like ring flash for macro photography. I don't use ring flash, never have. It's too much of a directional light, too much of a flat light for me. I like having the light come from different angles where it actually gives you a little bit of definition, a little bit of contour. And you can see the reflection of the eyes of this little jumper and some lupins. And again, you can control the light. It doesn't matter. That's the beauty of that setup that I showed early on is I can go anywhere, anytime. And techniques, and stuff come into play. Observation. I see little sleeping bags out like in stems. I see like little bits of silk on top of plant stems. Most likely I know, okay, that's a jumping spider lives in there. They're diurnal, they're hunting during the day, so they need a safe place to go to at night, or if there's danger. So they retreat back to their this little silken sleeping bag. This one happened to be like openish, it was a kind of a windy day, so like the plants were moving all around, but it's still like retreating back in there. And so it's fun. It's observation. You see it, you're like, all right, I see these things. I know what I'm probably going to find. And if you're interested in it and you like spiders, like I do, and I don't know who wouldn't like spiders, because look at them, look how adorable they are. They're the gateway spider. That's how you get people interested in spiders, like jumping spiders. They're the gateway one. You're like, I'm afraid of spiders. And then you're like, I've got a couple that you should look at here. And they're like, oh, that's so cute. And you're like, exactly, right? Then you move forward and now you're best buds. And again, just controlling the light. You have the light fall off. You get this almost like, it looks like it's glowing from the light from within. And day, night, you don't know. So it's in the hydrangea bush in the front yard. Surprise. Probably middle of the day though. That's when I do most of my photos, is during the day. So did all this, the lights, and you have lenses. Say you want to try this out, and how can we turn a non-macro lens into a macro lens? There's a couple different options, and I played around with them all: diopters, extension tubes, and the lens reversing. Extension tubes, not bad, fun. Diopters, easier. They go on the front of the lens. You can clip it on and off and get some magnification. Works better if you have a lens that's like, say maybe like half life size or stuff like that. You can work with it that way. I can actually put a diopter on the front of my my 100 to 400 or my 200 millimeter lens and turn it into a 1-to-1 macro at from a couple feet away.
What's an example of the diopter focal length that you would use?
Longer is better. Longer is better. Like on a 200, if you have a 200 millimeter lens or so, something that does like in that range, you're going to get a better magnification off it.
Could you use reading glasses?
No, you're probably, if you use your reading glasses like a regular magnifying glass, the optics of the glass, you're probably gonna get a lot of like chromatic aberrations. So you're gonna start, the light's gonna come through and it's gonna bend. So you're gonna get like these red-green like highlights and stuff like that, which is, not good and really hard to correct for in post, and or it's just going to be blurry. on the sides. It's going to look smeared. Kind of like some of like when you see like people use like the phone macro lenses. If they're like, you buy it off somewhere, then they're really super inexpensive. It's not high quality glass, and you'll get that same kind of like the lights. You're only going to get a clear image in the center. The rest of it's just like smeared. It looks like you're traveling at warp speed through space. So out of these, probably in the extension tubes are going to work. A shorter lens works better. So you're like, I've got a 24 millimeter lens. Well, you could throw, a 13, millimeter, extension tube on there, and all of a sudden, it's going from, like half life size or quarter life size, it's going almost to like full life size, 1:1. Reversal tube does the same thing, where it's like if you have like a 24 millimeter, it's a little more complicated because I'll show a picture of it. It's basically, it goes between the lens and the camera, and it takes the lens and it physically flips it around. So instead of taking a big image and projecting it small, it takes a small image and projects it large. That's the kind of way it does it. I played around with it on the lens, what I was using. I didn't like it at the time because I like fixing things to the front of my lens to help with my diffusion. And at the time, it was harder to affix something to which is now the back of the lens, but the front, the front of the lens facing the subjects. Adapters can actually work really well as well. So again, these are examples just of what they look like. Extension tubes. If you have a lens that has electronics in it, you want one with electronic contacts. This way it passes all the information from your lens to the camera. In the case of the extension tubes, you've got a 50 millimeter that does, half-life size. All right, sweet, I'm halfway there. You need to add about 50 millimeters of extension tube to get it then to be 1:1, which then makes, a lens that's like this. It may, depending on the size for the 50, it's going to add, more length to the lens. So for shorter lenses, it works better. If you had like a 200 millimeter lens, you don't necessarily want to put 200 millimeters worth of extension tube, on the lens. You could do it. You can do a lot of things. There's no wrong answers in this. But it becomes the aspect of like, you've got these hollow tubes and this big heavy lens, like you need a lot of support to do that, and just not highly recommended. Teleconverter is a sneaky little trick, because a teleconverter is giving you magnification. It's projecting the image large. So my 100 millimeter, I did this in the early days. My 100 millimeter now was 1:1, but I turned it into a 140 millimeter that's doing technically 1.4:1. So I get a little bit extra magnification. I'm not really changing my working distance at all, but I'm getting a little extra reach, a little bit of extra crop. And then you add the teleconverter, and then you throw a diopter on the front of that, and now suddenly I go from 1.4:1. I'm going to like 2:1, 2.5:1. You're stacking your diopters. You're going to like 3:1. It's ways of doing it that they're a little bit more affordable. Extension tubes, super affordable. Teleconverters, good ones, not as affordable. Diopters, if you're buying good ones, are also a little bit pricey, but they're well worth it. I still use my diopters when I want to even push my 5x magnification. Like I was pushing it to almost 8, 9x by adding the diopters on the front of that, just to like get even more extreme. And the beauty of the diopters are, you clip it on, screw it on the front of your lens. You don't have to change the lens in the field. You're not opening it up for dust or anything like that. It's on the front, take it back off, put it back in your bag, wherever to go. Extension tubes, teleconverters, you have to think about this. You have to, it's just this conscious, decision of like, hey, I'm going to go out and use this, and it stays on. Now, for my 100 to 400, that I use, I do have a 1.4 teleconverter that I pretty much have been keeping on there, and it works beautifully. They're both Canon, good. There's no really loss of image quality. Turns that 400 to like 560, a little extra reach, a little extra magnification, with little loss. And there's like this electronic lens reversal that's mated together. They're cool, they work, and you can take, some lenses and, flip them around and, turn them into macro. It's just, I've seen this setup more when people are building relays and like converting like 24 millimeter or 40 millimeter lenses to do more extreme macros work. And this is a quick little like example of like playing around, like my 24-105, my kit lens that, it's still an L lens that came with my original Mark II, but I put some extension tubes on the back of that, and suddenly I've got a pretty decent macro lens. Now the problem is still I have to figure out like how to light this. I have my lighting set up for my macro setup, so I would have to build a whole new diffusion rig. And I'm a fan of diffusion rigs that are attached to the camera itself and not off-axis, flash and camera, because my techniques require both hands, and it's like much more stable than holding the camera and trying to hold the flash. And I'm not setting up things in the field like a studio and putting tripods and stuff like that. Like it's not how I work. And then on the bottom, I have like that would be on my 100 millimeter lens, where it's like, okay, you have like a teleconverter, and then I put a Raynox on front. So instead of just going like from 1 to 1, I can now increase my magnification to, like it was about probably like 2.5 times life size. I was starting to chase going larger than actual size, and that's when I was like, I'm just gonna, invest in the MPE 65 and just be that. Like if I really want to consistently go from 2x to 3x, then I really should have a lens that does that. And I use magnification as a composing tool as well. So that for me made a lot of sense. And other means of like photography, right? So when we talked about macro and doing all that kind of work and focusing on subjects, there's also we have close-up, which is more like wide-angle work, and then telephoto lenses. Now, I say macro photographer, so I am a macro photographer, but I do other things besides just like extreme, like macro work. Really, I could probably say I'm a conservation photographer more than just but I do a lot of macro photography, so that kind of like resounds with people. So in this case, you have this one was using the Venus, the 15 millimeter. So this was using the 15 millimeter. And the reason why you'd use like close-up photography like this, where you can get, obviously as in the name, close up to a subject, but you get to see some of the definition in the background. You get to see some of the scene. You get to see kind of, what exists. You can go further than this with other types of lenses, but it's a great way to start with using, like wide lenses. And it is a different way to tell the story, and that's a primrose moth caterpillar on common evening primrose. They really do blend in really well. Their camouflage is like pretty good when you see them. So you just look for the little holes in the seed pods. You look for the holes in the seed pods, you know that most likely there's a caterpillar somewhere in there looking for it. Same thing, you see frass. You see frass, you know there's a caterpillar somewhere. Look for frass, look for the signs. And this is one of our Brudex cicadas, again, with the 15 millimeter. Why? I wanted to show like some of the environment. I wanted to show some of the path that it existed in that you can't do with other forms of, like with other lenses. My macro lens, I would only be able to get, part of the cicada. Telephoto, depending on where I was in relation to cicada, would probably either compress the background or it would just be completely blurred out, depending on where I was in relation to it. So it's a good way of like, okay, I can get it relatively large in the frame and at the same time show some of the background. And in the cases like this, I'm not worried about going 1-to-1 actual size. I'm just trying to get it as close and clear as I can. Same thing, shot with a 15 millimeter, was after a rain. This is the same bee from earlier that I showed. That one was photographed with the MPE. This one was photographed with the 15 millimeter, just to show part of the park behind it. But even in macro, even in close-up photography, with using normal lenses, the closer you get, the shallower your depth of field is going to go. So you can't cheat, like, there's no free lunch. You can't cheat the physics of it. You try and, focus down, and then I'm like balancing with this, like, okay, I can stop it down to a certain point, but now I'm losing light. I have to do this balancing act of like, okay, how much, can I stop the lens down to get the background to be clear? How much, light am I losing? I'm still using flash to illuminate it, but it's a fun way to tell a story. These were shot with a little relay lens, so it's different ways of doing it. We're making my own lens that fits on my MPE lens. So it's a lens that goes on front of a lens, and it allows you to do the same kind of like wide angle work, but I don't have to change up my setup. I can just add a lens to the front of the lens, a couple of additional settings, and I can get similar effects as the Venus. And same thing, this is a relay lens of this Polyphemus caterpillar, big old caterpillar and some dogwood. And it gives a little bit, you can get some that have extreme depth of field, but it gives you a little bit even more depth of field without, stopping down like appropriately. So there's different ways of telling that kind of story. Why? Because, I have this big old, caterpillar. Like I could do some detailed portraits of it where I just see like its, its feet or its face or such like that, but you don't get the context of where it exists in the world. And when you're trying to tell a story and trying to, tell people this is where you can find things, it helps. And, again, then I'm using telephoto lenses, like, and here we are playing around with the 100, 400, just to kind of tell the story. Again, favorite, I think Viceroys might be one of my favorite butterflies. One, because they're cool. Two, they like resting with their wings, like out like that. And a fun little fact, when they spook off and like fly away, most of the time they're going to come back to the same spot that they just like left. They'll come back, so you can kind of like anticipate what they're doing, what their behavior is. They're a little bit more, I think, photogenic, and their larvae are super cool. They look like poop. Another thing about, this an aside I'll throw in. Most of macro photography is looking at things that look like poop to see if it's really poop or not. That is the majority. I say that this is the majority. That's everything I say. That's the majority of what I do. But it's a lot of what I do is like, is it poop or not? And most of the time, you get lucky and it's not poop. It's like, caterpillars, some moths and such like that. It's great. It's great camouflage. Their larvae look like poop. I mean, to the point like all curled up and such. I'm done talking about poop. And, again, still telling the story, it's like, here we have, a little leaf cutter, coming in, on the swallowtail, and then ironweed's in, full bloom now. Anywhere you go, it's like a wonderful bit, and knowing like, okay, this is what we have. Happy. I love to say, I totally planned this for the bee, because the bees are constantly bombing, the butterflies and such like that. But just having fun, telling, again, telephoto work and such like that, it still falls in the realm of this whole nature photography bit. And, we're talking like about macro in particular, but it all kind of like, these all work together. Like you don't have to be, mutually exclusive. Have fun out there. Composition. I think it plays a huge role in what I do. And early days, I was photographing high magnification. I wanted to go like, I'm trying to go as close in as I can, like cropping it on the frame, leaving very little room for, bleed, cropping, doing anything in post, which is really funny because I worked in advertising for a very long time and on doing magazines and layout and such like that. And like when I hand off my work sometimes to people, I need a little, I need that little bleed room. You need that like room, to compose. So I started backing off. And mind you, I'm still doing like 1-to-1. I can only do 1-to-1 with my lens, but I still give myself a little bit of room to kind of like maybe nudge it in post if I want to and crop in because I am a designer. But I still use my magnification with my lens as a composing tool. So I'm trying to compose the scene in frame as I'm photographing it. So a lot of times when I'm photographing, I think of the negative space. It's not just the bee or insect, dead center in there. I do that a lot. But there's a lot of times where I'm like, all right, I need things with negative space. I need things, with room around it. Same thing with this little Lazio on some cut leaf coneflower. That rotting stump, and we talked about this one, before we showed it, but I knew at the time when I did this it was a conscious decision of like, oh, sweet, I know she's, coming out of the her nesting hole, but I also have some like shows and things coming up. I need some material for myself. I need some, photos that I'm taking that have these like negative space and these areas in it that I can put type and use it because, again, being a designer, I want to use that. But I'm still using, I'm photographing and I'm still using the space to compose. And I will use negative space a lot. And this, I did like a little grid overlay, kind of show like I'm showing in this like this lower like, third, 2/3 area. And in a case like this, I'm photographing this wonderful little ambush bug nymph on some blanket flower. But I left the left side, purposely. I wanted this flood of green. I wanted this area. I'm not always trying to do this extreme like macro when I'm doing my macro work, because I want to show as much as the lens will show some of the environment or some of the color, but I also want to highlight the negative space as much as I do the positive space. Cases where I go, yes, I am going to go like symmetrical, same subject, same area, but that one I saw from the top, and when I looked through the lens and I was kind of like moving things around, seeing, because these bugs really do not move that much unless they're highly disturbed. I saw it from the top and I'm like, oh, this is sweet. Like, this is like, I haven't really seen a dorsal view of these ambush bugs before. Loved it. One of my personal favorite images. And I just love like playing then. Now I'm playing with symmetry. I'm trying to get as symmetrical as I can. And mind you, this is all handheld in the field. Like just everything, because to try and set this up, by the time you would pull out like any sort of like pincers or movers and wires and like put a tripod, most likely then you're going to create enough of a ruckus that things are going to move away from you, and you're no longer going to get the image. And again, just kind of like centered shots, but composing. Still see like some of that we're talking about, like the light. You can still see the light across when we're talking about like light and diffusion and how to get it nice and soft. That was an agapostima male in the I'm forgetting my flowers right now, so we'll move on. I always joke, why the long face? It's a Bombus impatiens, common eastern bumblebee. They do have a really long face. They have really beautiful faces, and this one happened to be, it was probably like a cooler day, so I was able to get some like portraits of it while it was still, using that to my advantage, but trying to get that portrait as much as I can like symmetrical. I do play with like either off symmetry or perfectly, trying to get as perfectly symmetrical as I can. In the case of this male wasp, it's a European wasp. I knew when I was photographing it, like I had to play with composition because the way its antenna were going, it would have gone almost touching like edge to edge of the frame as I'm photographing it. And that's no good. I didn't like that. That bisected the frame like right in half. So a little tilting of me, and when it was on, I got to like play with like a little bit of like dynamic angles, still leaving a little bit of space. It's just it's always a conscious effort when you're photographing your subjects of like, how it's going to be displayed, how are you going to use it as a designer, or making choices because you go like, all right, you have this like white marked tussock, caterpillar, and it's got the hairs, tussock hairs that go just everywhere, and they're out of frame and they're everywhere. So I'm not going to be able to get the whole thing in there. So I have to focus on how am I going to present this? How am I going to going to crop this, in camera, without it being like completely out. And bagworm moths, love them when they're out. They're beautiful. And this one would never fit, it's about yay big. So it would never fit on my 35 millimeter sensor. So a little, trickery from me by, going on an angle, a little trickery with, holding the bagworm to get, to fit kind of like diagonalish on a slant. In the frame, I'm able to get what I consider, a little bit more dynamic image, because you have this like spiral shape coming in, the negative space between that and the leaf, and highlighting a subject that most people don't stop to take photographs of. And it's kind of cool too, because most of the time when you see bagworms, you don't get to see them out of their casing. They're always like hidden up into their casing. So it was kind of exciting that this one was out and kind of like feeding a little bit and kind of like a little bit more active. So how do I get my shot? Oh, I got a prop. I got a prop. I'm gonna use a prop. I got two props. I'm gonna put one prop down. I got excited for a second. So how do you get the shot? First of all, relax. Just chill. Relax. Like, surprisingly, I feel like I'm hyper. When I'm out in the field is when I'm slow. And that's when I'm quiet. I'm in my spot. I'm in my zen. If you're, running around trying to take photographs of insects and bees and you're going to chase everything away. You have to be slow. You have to be deliberate. When I'm walking even out in the field, like my step is very deliberate, very slow. Sometimes garners a little bit of looks, whatever. It gets the work done. Two, you can't go over, like most insects, you can't go over and try and photograph right over them, because you have this, imagine if you were here and this giant thing came up over your head, right? It would spook you. It would scare you. You'd probably run away. So you want to approach subjects from, their level or slightly underneath. Now you're not perceived as much of a threat. It's much easier to do that. To do that, generally, typically, depending on where the plants or flowers, wherever you're photographing is, you have to get down to that level or lower. If you are photographing something, there's a flower here and up, you could still photograph from here, and then your arms, your body makes a difference. You're a brace. You want to use your body as a brace. You don't want to hold the camera. It goes, quite well for phones as well. You don't want to hold the phone out like this, where your arms are all moving around. You want to lock it down almost like you're the tripod, right? Because now when I'm moving like this, I can move things around, and it's less likely to shake than I can't hold my, I'm pretty good with stuff. I can't hold my arms that still to hold things. You start locking things down. And in my case, when I'm photographing, I have the lens, now let's say the lens is here, right? So I've got the lens here. I'm looking through my viewfinder. My viewfinder is pressed up against my face and my eye. Don't wear my glasses. So that's a point of contact. So now the camera's attached to my head, attached to my arm. I'm here. And if I can, because I'm using a lens with a very short working distance, I can sometimes reach out and either grab whatever I'm trying to photograph, on the stem. So most of the things that you see, I'm actually touching or holding the flower while I'm photographing it. They think they call it the left-handed brace. Or if I'm photographing something like here, there's a spider here, I can have the lens here, and I can actually then, use my hand as a bridge and brace, to whatever I'm photographing. What you're trying to do is lock everything down. In the case of, this is how I do it, mind you, right? All handheld, no tripods. I want to be able to lock everything down, and this allows me, this is why I like the light being all contained, because now I can move in, or I can take, I can hold, and I know which bees I can, that aren't going to fly away, or which beetles, or whatever else. You can hold things and kind of move it around. I can get the right position. And in cases too, counterintuitive, if you're using a macro lens, and you can do 1-to-1, set it to your minimum focusing distance, whatever that is. Don't adjust your focus by using, by using the lens. You want to rack, yep, you got it. You rack in and out. You have much more control, and you'll be able to go in subtly, like, back in and back out that way. And it's muscle memory. It's practicing. I feel like I just oversimplified this. It's easy. Come on, guys. You can do it. But it is. It's just that. It's just like learning these tricks. And again, it's like this, just slow down. Like when you're out and you're photographing things. We're not running and chasing stuff, especially when I'm photographing. Bees and some of our smaller native bees and such like that. Like they're moving a lot. And if I'm walking through a field, like this, activity it's disruptive. I'm something new in the environment. This vibration's causing things to fly away. I'm knocking plants around. They're thinking something's going on. They're, flying away because they don't want to get hurt. She's a solitary bee. It's just her. If she dies, the offspring she's provisioning for will never, won't survive, or, she hasn't finished provisioning for them. So it's just kind of like, that's it. Oh, and the other trick that I use, that because you're focusing on, this would be like I can use double clicker. I love props. So you have a subject here. This is like a little bee. This little bee's like, let's say it's here. I'm focusing on the eyes because the eyes have it, right? If you have the eyes in focus, it's like people photography, it's like animal photography, any kind of photography. If you have the eyes in focus, everything else falls into place. People will forgive a lot in your image if the eyes aren't clear. Then people don't know what to look at, and then sometimes the image then falls apart. So you do this, but you're like, okay, well, I'm close, and I know my depth of field, I can't really go beyond f11 because I'm going to get diffraction, and it's just going to be fuzzy. I'll have more depth of field, but it's going to be soft. So what do? I have my, my lens, and I have my imaging sensor. I want my lens to be perpendicular, my sensor to be parallel to the subject. You want to move it to try and get, if you want to get the most depth of field from front to back, and you just kind of move it along to figure out as you're adjusting it, you'll start noticing, as long as you keep that eye in focus, you'll start getting more in focus along it moves along the insect. It's relatively simple, but you're dealing with a subject that's less than 10 millimeters, maybe 5 millimeters. Your depth of field is maybe 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters. So it all becomes really exaggerated, where the subtle movements, hence why the racking in and out, it helps. In the MPE, it only rack focuses. There is no focusing on that. If you twist the lens, it actually changes magnification. So which then does change. You could say focusing, but it's really changing magnification, not focus. So relative, that's behavior. That's another important one, because it was the whole observation. Is the whole observation thing. Photographing bees, good example. I know with most bees, when they are feeding on a flower, what are they doing? Are they collecting nectar, or are they collecting pollen? If they're collecting pollen, I might say, okay, they're doing something called come around the mountain. I know that they're going to be moving around the flower clockwise, counterclockwise. Now I'm trying to take a portrait of this bee. So what am I doing? I'm waiting for that moment where I see it come across that flower. I'm like, all right, I know when you're here in that back quarter area, I want to take my photos. And I know you're going to walk back around, doing your thing, collecting, foraging. You're going to come back around. I can take another couple photos, and I can do this, repeatedly. Or so cases like the Viceroy, you're going to fly off, you're going to come back. I don't have to move my focus and try and chase you, because I know you're going to be back here, so I'm going to focus back on here. Same thing. Sometimes even bees will do that. Like, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been actually holding on to a flower because I was going to photograph a bee. It kind of flew away, and then all of a sudden, whoop, another bee just lands on that flower as I'm ready to take a photo, take a photo of it. But it's like, it's just paying attention to your subjects, knowing what they're doing, how they're moving, how they're kind of like, interacting with the environment. And just once you get to know the subjects, you can kind of like, you can guesstimate their actions and reactions to you. And it's just like, it takes some of the guesswork out of it. And that's how I get most of my images. I know the behaviors, a lot of the subjects. I don't know if I could rattle them off all right now, but like when I'm out, I'm like, oh, I know you're going to do this. I know I can approach you. I know you're going to fly away. I know if I look under here, I'm probably going to find something. The other day, I was out on a walk, we saw a bee. The bee was, dead in the flower. And they're like, oh, wonder what maybe got it. It was a spider. I said, look underneath it. It could be an ambush bug. I said, most likely that's kind of like their tell. They're going to, like, once they, kill their prey, they're going to move underneath it to feed it. And what was it? There was an ambush bug. So it's just this observation of knowing how things act and react. And, that can only be learned by being out, into the field. I'm trying to think of any other good, like, wonderful tips. You got a tip?
I got a tip.
Look.
When the insect is moving, you can sneak in on it. When it stops moving, you need to stop moving.
That is absolutely true. They do react to that. And again, that was like when we're talking about that, like when you come in, like if you're coming in like on their level, they're less likely to spook, and fly away, than if you're coming like above it. And in the case of knowing too, like different altogether, when I use my flash, I'm using my flash all on manual. Why? Because if you use, through the lens metering and you're trying to photograph, say, a long-legged fly, I don't know if you knew this about long-legged flies, they can teleport. They have the ability. So, mainly a joke, but they do. So when your flash, you do through the lens, it does a quick little pre-flash that you can't register. That's, getting the data and sending it back to the camera. But that quick little flash is enough to make the fly leap away, and you get a leaf. You get a stem, you get nothing. If you use manual, they still kind of go, what? And they kind of like, they do a short little hop and like, transport, but they're not flying completely away. It's more like, hey, what was that? Like, it overrides them. It's not like that double flash, it's one single flash. And you learn that like, oh, some little butterflies like hair streaks and stuff like that react to that as well. If you use through the lens flashing, they do not like that. They will fly away. You use manual flash, you actually have a little bit more control. Plus I like manual settings anyways, because photographer, artist, whatever, what we do is I want to be able to reproduce my results. That's what a professional is, right? It's not, it's not selling your work. It's not doing anything. It's setting out and going like, I can go out into the environment or do whatever I do, and I can get the results. Like, it's not guesswork. I'm not, I'm hoping that the subjects show up. There's no guarantee always for that. I'm not always guaranteed that the subjects are going to be, comply with me wanting to take photos of them. But my exposure on my camera stuff, like there's no guesswork. Like when I'm out in the field, I'm not thinking of like, what f-stop should I use? What's my, ISO? I have it. It's all become muscle memory where I'm like, all right, it's seen this. I'm going from 200 to 400. My aperture pretty much stays the same unless I'm doing extreme magnification, which then it has to get lower because diffraction, magnification. And it helps it be a little bit less blurry, the less effects of diffraction setting in. But for the most part, like if I'm doing my like 1:1, 3:1, my settings are all within the certain range that I just know. It's all just experience. It's practice. It's getting the gear, going out there and having fun. This is fun. It seems like it could be a lot of work. but it's so much fun. I can't express how much fun it is. Like this little, just in case you cared, which I know you all do, this little Lazioglasm on blanket flower. She's probably about maybe 3 millimeters in size. Just so you know. Photographed her a little over like 1-to-1 or so, because I wanted to have this like big like flood of I wanted to have like the big flood of like negative space to go with. Plus I can cheat it too of like the less magnification. When I go from 1-to-1, 2-to-1, I have slightly more depth of field than when I'm starting to go from like, I have to fight a lot more with adjusting for the angle of the insect from 2 to 3 to 4x. So, I have more images, I forgot. Helictis legatus on blanket flower and having fun, like little times portraits a little bit. This is an earlier image where I was doing more like tighter shots. This is the Agochlorella arata on geranium. This is one of those ones of like tips, like knowing the insect's behavior. So I know that she is going to dive down. The geranium's kind of like deep, the flower. She keeps like diving down to the bottom, but she's coming back up because she's like collecting pollen. So I was waiting for her to come back up and start, biting on the flower and actually using, her legs to collect some of the pollen. So it's just like sitting and waiting, playing a game and like moving around the flower. I'm holding on to the flower, mind you, to get the best angle that I can, and also to get the color around it. You have little teeny, like this ironweed and the wonderful white pollen ironweed, and we have this little, again, I like Lazioglasms. I love the small sweat bees. They're some of my favorite subjects to photograph. But again, holding on to the ironweed, flower, and kind of moving around to get the best, angle. And I know, like with these bees, like, they're pretty tolerant, like unless you're really shaking the flower, they're really not gonna, fly away. Lace bugs, probably pass by them all the time. You see like a little like brown spot on your leaves and stuff like that in your plants. It's about like 2 millimeters in size. Again, this is like that whole, like, I like to, try and do a like top-down symmetrical shot of that, because from the side, just the way their shape is, they're a little more difficult to, tell what it is. But they do have this beautiful, like almost like stained glass pattern to their wings and their covering, and hence the name, lace bug. And they're quite gorgeous. Agapostemum on some aster. And again, trying to get the lighting so it's all even. Like you couldn't tell like that was really photographed with a flash. It's harder to tell because the light's soft enough where it fools some people, thinking like, they think, is this daylight? I've had people ask that, like, is this daylight shooting it? Like, how are you diffusing the light? Like how are you diffusing the light so much without getting any really harsh cast shadows as well, which is like usually indicative of people using flash, is that you have these harsh shadows that really, tell. Or this little Haleus, little mass bee. Cool thing about these little Haleus in the stilbe is that they do not carry their pollen. They look almost like a small little wasp. They don't carry pollen on the outside of their bodies. They actually have a crop. They ingest the pollen inside, like they hold it in this crop, and then they'll regurgitate it into their nest, provision for their young. But most people see them and they think that they're like small flies or gnats or such like that, or maybe even a small wasp, because they don't have hairy legs. They don't carry pollen on their legs. They carry it inside. Really cool bees. So the phone is a support tool. So it's my phone. I have a little moment lens that I rarely use not because I don't like it, but because when I'm out in the field, I have my gear with me. I have my camera stuff, with me. You can do any of the like photography I did, like the tips and tricks of like, moving things and such like that. Like, you can use these same techniques for, the phone, and especially like, knowing like coming in, like the position of the holding, holding, way you're holding the phone camera and such like that. If you don't have stabilization, I see the gentleman, you had the grips on your phone. So it's the same kind of thing where you're stabilizing the phone. So you're not just holding it, if you are holding it, you want to make sure it's like steady. And for me, I use the phone as a great tool because the video quality actually off the phone is pretty sweet. Like it's really great for doing like video because you can shoot some 4K video, and the 4K doesn't care if it's being used off a small sensor or a large sensor. It's still 4K video. It still works. So I will do a lot of like video off my phone, as well as I use it a lot for support in my line. I use it a lot for support. So I'm going to document when I'm photographing. I'm documenting the environment. I'm documenting some of the subjects and such like that. It really functions well as that support tool. So I listed some pros and cons. And the pro is like, because I've used it out, it's usually the camera you have on you. That's the thing. It's like it's the camera you have on you. Some of the modern like phones, their macro capabilities, pretty spectacular. The cameras are actually pretty solid. So it's a useful tool, but in the same aspect, you don't have a true flash on for like freezing motion and stuff like that. You're reliant on trying to do something makeshift or using a lot of available light. And it's, if you're doing really extreme, work, you have to have some sort of add-on lens, which is something that you have to also, carry along, with you as well. And if we're talking like pure, like the semantics, it's the sensors on the phones are typically smaller than that of cameras. So are we talking true macro, true like 1-to-1, or we're talking like, some simulation of that? But is it, still acceptable? Yeah. And, some competitions are even, now accepting, like phone photography, as part of, the entry process. Like it was, you just say it was photographed on a phone and, you move forward with the entry. So it's very viable. For me, do I use it? No, not as much. I've tried, but I have the, it's like, it's kind of hard when you're like, but I have, the gear. Now, if I'm out, mind you, and I don't have anything else on me, and I have, all I have is my phone, am I doing it? Am I doing it the best that I can? Yes. Yes, I am. And still having fun with it. So just like examples of what I would say, like that are things that are, more for me when I use it as like documenting process. Like, we have the leaf miner up there. Like I'm like, okay, I want to photograph that because my macro lens can't get all the leaf for the mining activity. My telephoto lens that I have, I'm too far back. But the phone, I feel like Goldilocks. It was just right. It worked perfectly for that. And same thing with some of the other subjects. I want to document as I'm photographing it, just to go along. So the phone, perfectly acceptable. And, like I said, all the techniques can be kind of applied to it, except when it like relates back to just having actually the lens. Questions? Do we have questions? I can give you real answers. I can make them up. I'll let you figure it out.
When you're photographing at night, what kind of light are you using, like off camera, or are you using light off camera for just the purpose of focusing? Okay,
so the cool thing is that MT26EX, because it's a sweet light, has built-in focusing lights. So you program it to the camera, a nice little double tap of the shutter button. I'm illuminating my diffuser. I'm illuminating my scene. I can focus on the subjects. Press the shutter button. When I press the shutter button, that light cuts off. Flash illuminates. I reset back to 0.
Okay.
So that's why I love that combination so much, because you see everyone else, and now mind you, I have a video light that I could use that I made for this that It's a custom wire job that I have a button on the side of the camera that I can press that that could do the same thing, but I would have to remember then to shut that off before I triggered the shutter, or have to compensate the the flash accordingly. So, that's why I love that MT, because it has the built-in focusing lights, and it's like that combination is just like, I don't know why other lenses or other flash companies haven't done that for macro people, because it is absolutely brilliant and has been since their first iteration. Anyone else?
Would you just repeat the name of the flash?
Pardon?
The name of the flash.
The name? Well,
The brand?
oh, the brand. It's Canon. Canon. It's a Canon. The brand of the flash I use is Canon. Canon MT 26EX.
You happen to know what would go with a Nikon?
If you wanted to use twin flash or single flash.
Probably twin. I mean,
If you use the twins, Godox. Godox makes a twin flash that does that. Harder to diffuse. Again, harder to diffuse. Depending on your lens, you might be better off. And Godox is still a great brand for for flashes, anyways. But you might be better off with a single flash, like on the camera, and then diffused, like with that diffuser, kind of like that bonnet that I had shown for mine. So it kind of like depends on like what you're going to end up photographing. But the twin flashes they're wonderful, but they're wonderful in the situation, like a select situations. I don't know if that helps answer it.
Why the Canon? What makes you?
Why the Canon?
Why are you attracted to Canon?
Why the Canon? Because in yonder years, I had my AE1 program. I had a Canon film camera. So when I first got back into I bought my first DSLR. I was like, I was between like Nikon and Canon, and at the time, Canon had the 5D Mark II that had the video capabilities, full frame sensor, seemed like everything I wanted in the camera, even though I hadn't been really shooting that much beforehand. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna spend money, right? It's like the glass really didn't translate from the old days, and so it's just like taking money, putting out of a speeding train, letting go, and I'm like, I'm gonna go with Canon because it had the capability of doing video, and it just seemed that's what I was familiar with at the time. So I'm like, I'm gonna go with this, and I got the 100 millimeter. Came with the L lens, the 24-105L, and I bought the 100 millimeter macro, thinking I'm going to do some macro because I used to do this in the film days, and I still had my bellows and all these other things. And it took an additional like 8 years after that point before I started doing macro. So that's why Canon, they're all pretty much nowadays, like all the film, the camera brands, they're all good and great, and you can get all different results. And there's people get really fighty about what brands they like to use. I like the Canon. I like the color of the Canon. I know it, but now I have enough glass built up where it's it'd be harder to switch. And I still will say it, and for posterity, I love the MPE 65 and the twin flash combination. I just I haven't seen or felt anything else out there that really can do what that does. So.
And you don't do anything with in post color?
No. I mean, I process the images. I'm a retoucher and such, but yeah, I'm not boosting the saturation and doing this stuff. I try and keep as realistic as I can. Just because, and it's just because. And I mean, when you're entering contests and doing that stuff, that's the whole, you can't, you can't, as I said, you can remove sensor dust, but you can't, if there's a twig or a stick or something's blocking the eye and I see things that aren't exactly what I would consider the retoucher in me goes it's not perfect, but he goes, that's how it exists. That's the moment in time that was frozen. So.
just great how soft the light is. I mean,
That's when I say like that whole chasing the light, that's like been a key part of how I've photographed. And it was hard to get there. It wasn't like the easiest way. Like 10 years in, I've probably built twice as many diffusers for the flashes. I built some and scrapped them after a month and said, this is complete rubbish. This doesn't work. Some outlandish ideas. Some where I'm, blocking more light than diffusing it and learning the difference too. Bonus tip, blocking light is not the same as diffusing light. So putting a piece of white paper in front of your flash, you're going to be blocking more light than you are diffusing it. Putting two really thin pieces of vellum or something like that and passing the light through it will actually diffuse the light versus then just blocking it. And that's the whole thing. It's hard to understand in the beginning, when you see other people working. It's like you're not blocking the light. You're just making it soft. You're spreading it. You're trying to make it big, which is really hard in macro world and using the twin flash, because you have to do it at a very small distance. You have to take these very large concepts for portrait photography and compress it down to a very small area, which is why those bonnet diffusers work really well for most cases, because they're doing just that. They're taking this light here, it illuminates the bonnet. The flash is a good distance away, 6, 7, 8 inches away. It hits that bonnet, illuminates that whole bonnet. Now there's not one singular hot spot. It's illuminating the whole thing. Now that light is lighting up the subject. And you get that soft, and I keep moving wine to the left, but it keeps doing that that wraparound, which gives you that nice, really soft light.
so you said it's not about selling, but you are a pro, so what's the market?
What's the what?
What's the market?
What's the market?
Yeah.
That's weird. So I do shows, right? I display as fine art, so that's part of me. Part of me is the fine artist that displays the work on the wall to have these conversations. The other part of me does talks like this. A lot of my talks have actually been to garden clubs and such, getting gardeners and master gardeners to appreciate these insects and organisms. A healthy garden should have insect activity, should have insect damage. You want to see your leaves being eaten. You want to see your flowers being eaten. You want to see this. So that's part of it too, doing talks. The other market is doing contributing work to research as well. So yeah, conservation photography isn't the most highest paying field that you could get into, but after 30 years in advertising, which I still am in, it's what am I going to do with my life? What's my legacy? And I fell in love with this. It's fun. So it's I'm not necessarily trying to sell, buy these prints. I do shows and stuff like that. So prints are available for sale, as well as t-shirts, since we're marketing. But no, it's more about I want to change people's opinions on how they view insects. It's important. Spiders and stuff like that. It's great. I have an exhibit up at the Belle Isle Nature Center, and it's so awesome because I have this picture of a syrphid fly out in the middle, and it's happened on more than one occasion where I'm just out there doing what I do, which is lurk in the weeds and take photographs of insects. And I hear people talking, and they'll walk by and oh, I got stung by that. I don't like that. No, you didn't. And I'm from the weeds. It's so fun. No, you didn't. And it's and they'll look around. I'm you didn't get stung by that. And it's well, but I know I got stung by that. I'm no, and I'll pop up no, you most certainly did not. I'm that's a fly. Cannot sting you. And they're oh, wait a second, are you yes, I'm the photographer. And I'm I absolutely know 100%. But it's there's these conversations where you get people or they're I was out in the yard and I got stung, this and that, and they're they talk ground bees, and I got stung, and all these ground bees, I got stung. Those are wasps. Well, no, they were, trust me, they were wasps. And I could say from, we were talking about taxonomy earlier, and it's it's taken me this long to look at things and be able to differentiate bee, wasp, fly, they're great at mimics. Most people, like the common, the common folk, you look at something, and it's really easy to mix up a bee, a fly, and a wasp. Like, super easy. So, yeah, I'm just trying to change people's opinions. I'm trying to, we live in this little planet, and we need our insects, we need our world, and they're absolutely beautiful and fun, and that's my market.
Apart from the images, the value of your journals seem to be pretty strong. What do you do with the information that you journal?
Well, the information I journal now is mainly, unfortunately, as I was progressing, I was getting busier with other things. I wasn't keeping as much journaling because I kept it more in my head, but I have a catalog. I have a catalog of and mind you, a lot of them are probably repeat images because I take, this is a bonus tip. When you take photos, take as many photos of the subject as you can, and when you think you're done, take more. You do not go and be like, one photo, I got it. It's done. I'm done. It's like I take photos and photos and move and because there's a new behavior, new something, a new angle. Or if I'm using it for taxonomy purposes, I might need, there's a particular spot on the leg I may need, or the abdomen, or I need to see wing venation, I need to see something. So I'm trying to take as many different photos as I can as well. Like when I get the shot that I think I want, then I take more shots and more images as long as the subject is complying. But yes, I have a whole catalog of probably about 500,000 images sitting on multiple drives, all my networks and stuff like that. It's fun. I mean, I love what I do, and I love doing this, and I love talking to people. We need more macro photographers. My goal would be each one of you walks out of here and is a year from now you're like, look at this, Joseph. Look what I did, and I'm like, sweet. I say, be better than me. Be better than me. We need this. We need the attention. We need people to see, things that most people overlook on a daily basis. People pass by. People don't pay attention. You're not looking up in the trees, seeing what's crawling, what's going. You're not looking what's on the ground. You're not, having fun. Go in your backyard, take a piece of bark, flip it over, see what's there. You don't have a macro lens, use a magnifying glass. See who's visiting. It's so much fun. That was way off the marketing question or wherever else. I don't know how I got there. This is me non-presentation, just talking. Getting a little wrapped up. I like to talk.
So many questions.
I'll do this again.
Oh yeah.
If you don't have it, you have it. Also, please bug me. This is a fun little thing I did for fun. But thank you guys so much. I hope I hope you got what you needed out of it. And again, I am open to conversation. I put my information up there for a reason. I do like people, I've had people from the last couple of presentations reach out, have questions, comments, things like that. The information, I'm not, gatekeeping this information. I got it from other people, I got it from learning and experiencing. It's just, we'll pass it on. Go forth, be macro-y. I don't know what to say. We're probably still rolling, and I'm still talking.